Welcome to Stemiverse podcast episode 55. In this episode, Peter talks with Norman Pirollo. Norman is the editor of WOODSKILLS magazine, an online woodworking instructor and author. In a previous life, he was a C++ developer for some of the largest computer companies in the world. He decided to turn his life around and dedicate himself to CAD design, prototyping, and creating contemporary furniture at his company, Pirollo Design. Norman writes and publishes woodworking courseware on his website and also teaches woodworking in the traditional in-person way. He's authored and published 4 books: The Wood Artist, Creating Art Through Wood, Start Your Own Woodworking Business, From High-Tech to Low-Tech, A Woodworker's Journey, which is a book that I'm currently reading, and Abstracted, An Artist's Journey. Most recently, Norman published WOODSKILLS, a biannual magazine about fine woodworking. This is Stemiverse podcast episode 55. Stemiverse is a podcast produced by Tech Explorations. Our mission is to help educators become awesome at teaching STEM, be it at home or in the classroom. Whether you are a professional or casual teacher teaching in a classroom or a parent or caretaker teaching at home, this podcast brings you the knowledge and experiences of practitioners, academics, entrepreneurs, and lifelong learners who are passionate about education and strive every day to help our children prepare for life in a world of radical change and, why not, abundance. Okay, so here we are. This is episode 54, I believe, and my guest today is Norman Pirollo, who is a woodworker from Canada. Hey, Norman, how are you today?
Very good. Yourself, Peter?
Great. It's a nice morning here in Sydney, and the weather is changing. As I was saying in my previous podcast, and I'm looking forward to a nice spring and summer. How are things in Ottawa in Canada?
Well, we've actually had a very warm, beautiful summer, and we're heading into fall now. But the summer seems to be prolonged, and it's another summer day today. So we're expecting everything to change very, very soon into fall weather. Yeah,
it's I particularly like changes in weather. Spring and autumn are my best seasons in the year. I guess it's change. Change is happening, and that's where you see it in the weather, at least.
Yes, it keeps us busy for all the things we put off or we postpone from season to season. So
I guess change is good in general, right? It's not just the seasons, it's life.
Yes. We're out on a country property here, so we have a few acres, and it's a considerable amount of work for each season. And I like to tell people I look forward to the winter season because that's when it slows down completely. We have snow here, so everything shuts down. Yeah. So I can focus more on my woodworking and my instructing and course material.
Yeah, I find myself being very productive as well in winter. It's like inside weather, so you get to concentrate on work. So, Norman, I'd like to, as always, just give you a few minutes to tell us a bit about you and where you come from, and a quick summary of your life, I guess, that brings you to where you are now.
Sure. I'm born and raised in Canada, and I lived in different cities in Canada. At the moment, I live I've lived here for over 30 years in this particular city, Ottawa, and I fell in love with it, but I lived in other cities. Born in Toronto, Ontario. Mm-hmm. So my upbringing was mostly in Toronto and the city of Montreal and Canada. And my teenage years were I was sort of inventive, and I like to tinker with things and play with electronics. I have an electronics background. I'm an electrical technologist by career. That was my very first career in my late teens, early 20s.
You said electrotechnologist. What is that? Yes. I haven't heard of that term before.
Okay, well, I guess it's not an international term. It's a Canadian term, I would imagine, or possibly US. It's just a notch above electronic technician. Mm-hmm. So we not only breadboard circuits and all that, but we do some design. So it's somewhere between a technician and an engineer.
Right.
It's a 3-year college program. It still goes on, so it's probably changed considerably since I've gone through. But
Right.
so that was my first career, and then I moved into. I was actually an in-house technologist for a company for a couple of years, and then I worked for large multinational computer firms for decades, literally decades, and they're mostly American companies, possibly companies you're familiar with, like MAI, Digital Equipment Corporation, Data General, Hewlett Packard. So I had a number of years with each of those companies. So at one point, my first career was a 3-year electrical technology program, but I started to develop a fondness for computer software. And computer software, when I went through my formative years were 1980s, 1990s, was a very exciting time for computer software. There were so many advances happening quickly. So I embraced software, and I began to study it. So I actually worked towards a computer science degree, which I have today. I completely did a shift from the hardware world of electronics to software, and I became a regional support person for these companies, and I supported Unix and wrote some code, and then I studied C for a year. Wow. Became a C programmer and all that.
So you did that like as a second career, essentially, right?
That was my main career.
Right.
My main, I say corporate career, you might say.
Yeah.
And then I slowly became disillusioned with everything because I had been in that industry for so many years, and I had seen so much change occurring so rapidly that I just couldn't keep up. It isn't a 9-to-5 job anymore. It's like a 24/7 job, trying to just keep up with technology and software and hardware. And it was exciting, but that excitement sort of wore off when I just couldn't keep up anymore. And I started to look towards something a little or considerably more slower paced. Yeah. And I began to investigate woodworking because I had worked with my father in my early years, and I remember some good things about woodworking. So I studied cabinet making at a college, and I worked towards a cabinet making diploma. Succeeded in getting that, and never actually worked in cabinet making. I did this while I was still in the computer field. And I slowly envisioned myself moving away from the computer field and into woodworking, because I realized at some point that I much prefer creating tangible objects instead of writing code. I mean, writing code was exciting for me, and still is for a lot of people, but I just had to get away from that and create objects, and I was so much happier doing that. So I strived towards establishing myself as a woodworker, furniture maker, and just did it part-time for a number of years. And then finally, along the way, I went through 3 downsizings with these companies I mentioned earlier. Yeah. And I like to tell people, 3 strikes and I'm out. So at one point I made the official decision to leave the industry and just be on my own. And I did some contract consulting work for a while, but I just kept going back to woodworking and furniture making. So my spouse was very supportive of me just giving up on the computer industry and reverting back to woodworking. So I'm not sure how much more you want, but
no, that's great. Because from here, there's so many places we can go to. Like I'm looking at your books, for example, and they are all about woodworking, and one of them in particular, I really like the title. It's very catchy, From High Tech to Low Tech, and I think it's a book in which you talk about this story in obviously a lot more detail. So I'd like to, as part of your journey, to maybe dig into that transition from low tech, from high tech, as you say, to low tech. So you spend a bit of time as an independent contractor, still in software. Right. Because that gave you the opportunity to spend more time building up your woodworking skills and eventually your woodworking business, right? So
Exactly.
can you tell us about that a bit more, especially like the transition? It's like, I imagine spring now, like spring comes in mind. You're going away from your corporate work in winter. Your vision is the summer where you'll be a full-time woodworker, but you are in the middle right now. What was it like for you? How long did it last? How did you make it work for you and your family?
Well, because as you mentioned, there's a book about it, and it was quite a long transition. And actually, the transition began as a part time. So I did this part time. I migrated from a hobby to a small part time business, and I just wanted a taste of a woodworking business.
Mm.
So I developed a small woodworking business, and it was fairly successful. But I couldn't manage the business with my career, and that was a little bit of a struggle. And so I stepped back from that and went and immersed myself back into my career because I was afraid of repercussions of abandoning my career or not keeping up with technology.
Right. Yep.
So it's not easy. It's not an easy transition unless you just do it cold turkey, for example.
So I'm thinking that like an obstacle that you had was that it wasn't just a matter of dropping your corporate work, specifically because you were in the software industry and the industry moves so fast forward, with new developments, new tools, new cloud comes in, makes things different. So you not only had to keep some customers, so you have a bit of income coming in, but also you need to keep training yourself and retraining yourself in that same field. So that makes it even harder to abandon it right away.
Well, that you hit on a very good point because my last position was fairly intensive. C++ programming support within Unix environment. And there was a considerable amount of training, and I just had to make a conscious decision to just walk away from it after my last downsizing. So it was not an easy decision because I kept, it was always in the back of my mind, am I making a huge mistake here? And what am I doing? And I'm going from the modern era to the to a sort of taking a step back in time, doing woodworking.
Yes, exactly. Which is, I was thinking about this and preparing. So woodworking, that is like the first maker was a woodworker thousands of years ago, right?
Exactly.
So we'll get to that as well. I think that's very interesting. So you decided at some point to just leave, right, and become a woodworker. You still need to train yourself. I know that your father was a woodworker. Is that right? And you have memories of him.
Well, he had different studied. He had different careers himself. So I take a lot from him in that regard. But it was mostly a hobby for him. So I worked with him, and I enjoyed the hands-on aspect of it.
I've got to disclose as well. My grandfather was a carpenter. So, and my uncle has got a furniture business. So he actually makes one-of-a-kind furniture pieces or chairs, table, and it's not IKEA style. Those are very elaborate pieces. So what I remember from those, especially from my uncle, is all the machinery that he's got in his workshop and that he's always covered in sawdust. And smells of the various chemicals that you use to cover the wood. I don't know the technical terminology, but the particular smell of freshly finished paste when it dries. Yeah, as it's drying. That's a smell that I've got from my uncle. So how did you go about learning this art? Because I know that you're putting art in there as well. A couple of the books, for example, you got one book called The Wood Artist, Creating Art Through Wood. So it's not just something that you can go to a technical school and learn, right? It's quite a bit more. So can you tell us about your transition from an apprentice woodworker, I guess, to an artist?
Okay, well, after having studied cabinet making, as I mentioned much earlier, and so I could actually work in the industry as a cabinet maker. That really did not satisfy me. I wanted very much like your uncle. That's what I do today. I do unique, one-of-a-kind pieces, and So I'm actually when I was fairly intrigued when you were mentioning all that.
Yeah.
So I not only am a furniture maker, but I design furniture, and I teach furniture making and woodworking.
Yeah.
So I've sort of developed a small niche for myself, and so I don't just want to be your conventional woodworker. And people sort of look down on woodworking and associate it with carpentry, and sometimes they mistake me and they'll call me a carpenter. And there's completely different disciplines. So I'm more into the science of woodworking and furniture making and intense design of furniture, um, and I work a lot with hand tools, going back to a tangible component. So I've actually taken up hand tool and I instruct using hand tools. So I've sort of developed a niche for myself in that regard. And now you mentioned the wood art, which is an interesting. I can get into that if you want to understand how that evolved.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Just want to say that woodworking has got its technical aspects, like learning how to do specific things, like join two pieces of wood together, use a particular tool, and things like that. But then the personal aspect comes out, and that's what I call the art. Like, how do you make a table look? There's so many different ways, and one of those ways is your way, which is very personal. So when did that aspect started coming out from you? You did your cabinet making, and then eventually became an artist. How did this happen?
Well, no, what happened is it's an interesting development, because along the way, so I'm kind of person, I guess it just follows from my software background, that I immerse myself into a subject, and I try to learn it in depth. So not just a woodworker, but I tried to understand the methodology behind joinery and design and wood movement, and it's quite a science, actually. Yeah. So along the way, have you ever heard of the word maquette? MAQUETTE, or a scale model? It's another word for scale model.
I can't really say that I know what it is, though.
Okay, well, it's just essentially it's a fancy word for a scale model.
Right.
So, for example, if I'm designing a piece of furniture, it's very expensive in materials to actually build a piece of furniture based upon a design that might or might not work. So you might have functionality, but the form isn't there. So what furniture designers do is they create scale models. They're a 5th or 6th scale. They're furniture. They're called maquettes, and then they can get it more of a 3D perspective of the furniture piece. We do that in CAD too now.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, I use CAD just as much as I do.
So you're not just low tech. You're both low tech and high tech at the same time now.
Exactly. So I'm able to build these skill models. I can show people. I can make enhancements and make some changes with very little use of material, and very rapidly build them with scrap wood. So along the way, I began to create some skill models, and an exhibition came up. It was a touring craft exhibition in 2009, and they were accepting wood objects. One, going back to the type of person I am, I'm not ever content with just making a conventional scale model. I had to dress it up, and so it looked so real that I would take photos of it, and people thought it was actually a full-scale piece of furniture. So I made a few of these pieces, and I entered 2 of them into this touring exhibition, and then they were accepted. And this was my entry into the art world. And then I began to focus a little bit on creating small-scale wood objects, not necessarily based on furniture, but just diverged from the furniture and into sculptural work. And eventually developed a fascination and a fondness for creating sculptures, and that went from there. And fast forward 2 or 3 years, and I had my work in 3 galleries in my my hometown here. So, and my sculptures became, and that second book you're referring to, the Wood Artist, is that the path from conventional woodworking to wood art. So that would possibly interest somebody trying to make that migration. The first book is my transition from my software and my technology background to woodworking, and so the second book, furniture making, and the second book is actually moving from furniture making to wood art, and I do both now, by the way. So that's
that is fascinating. I'm just thinking, what can you learn from those transitions? I think that transitions is where learning takes place. You didn't know something, now you do. So there's a transition there. In your case, you went from the corporate world into the woodworkers world. Were you able to extract lessons that you can generalize? Then perhaps people that are making similar transition, not necessarily from corporate job to self-employed, but it could be somebody who is moving, say, from one country, migrates to another country. So those types of big transitions, somebody who is moving interstate, for example, and totally changes the way that they live. Are there any general lessons that somebody can learn from reading your book?
To be persistent.
Yeah.
And you'll have a series of successive letdowns and I'm not sure the word, but disappointments, and
be ready for those.
It could be quite discouraging, and but persistence pays off. And I say that today, but I remember the journey, and it was quite a considerable struggle to have it happen. But it's paid off for me, and I don't look back now. I'm glad I left that industry, actually.
If you put yourself back in that time as you were moving away from corporate, did you have a clear idea of where you were going? So, for example, did you know that you were going to have Pirollo Design as a business then? Or you were still trying to figure out what is that you'll be doing?
No.
Yeah.
No. Actually, you mentioned that, and I'm really not a planner at heart. I sort of stumbled onto things as I go along, and it makes it exciting for me. I really don't plan. But just to give you a better idea of how little I plan, the title for that first book was one of the titles I'd come up with was The Accidental Woodworker. Just to give you an idea that there was no plan. So the plan was to leave one industry and migrate to another, or transition, but no plan.
Interesting. So what I understand then is that you knew that you wanted to leave, right? That was something that you had certainty about. You didn't want to go back, and in order to make that happen, you persisted and you went through that change, even though it was scary because you just didn't know where you were going, but you knew that you wanted to leave. I guess that's a lesson on its own.
Yeah, if there's a takeaway from all this, is to have considerable confidence in yourself and what you can achieve, and to ensure that whatever you're leaving, be it career, country, you're completely satisfied that the decision to leave is the correct one.
Yeah,
and that's an important part of the journey, because if you have, like I did, I'm only saying this because I didn't actually make that clean cut. I had doubts, and the doubts actually slowed my transition and spread it out over a number of years. But if you can remove all doubts and ensure that your decision is the correct one for yourself, then it just speeds things up, because you need to leave an industry or a country or something to
change your life.
Exactly.
I wonder if that is at all possible. I wonder if it's possible to go through a transition like that without any doubt. I think it's just human nature to have doubt constantly, but to have the strength to deal with it. Yeah.
I don't think there is a way to do it without doubt, without having doubts about the decision and just doubting yourself. Because I left a very lucrative, high-paying career to go into one of the lowest-paying careers. So there was no sense to it. There was no logic. There was no logic. Most people do it the other way.
That makes it even harder. But I guess you need to have strength of character to say, this is definitely what I want to do. Don't know how, but it will happen.
So I basically essentially stumbled onto the opportunities as they came along. Now, we mentioned the fact that I'm a woodworker and a furniture maker and designer and wood artist, but 20 years ago, I also stumbled onto instructional learning. This might interest your audience.
Yeah.
It was in its infancy at the time.
Could you describe what that is first, Norman? Like instructional learning, that's a term, but what does it mean?
Well, it means instructional courseware on different subjects. I embraced it, and I developed one of the earliest woodworking courses that you could actually learn from on a computer at the time. So you would go. It consisted of modules and lessons, and after every module, there's a series of questions, and you were graded.
Oh, I see.
Depending on how you did. Yeah.
So what you're saying is that as you were becoming a woodworker yourself, one of the things you did early on was to also become an instructor and create instructional courses on how other people can become woodworkers, right? So there's something you picked up fairly early on.
Yes, and this is actually the 20th anniversary of that course, that very early course, and it was nothing on the market at the time, and no way for people to learn woodworking. This was 10 years before YouTube existed.
So you're distributing your courses, were the video courses or paper?
No,
what was it like?
Video was in its infancy then. It was almost impossible to do anything with video because there was no standardization. So I could create
film.
videos, but they wouldn't. It just didn't work. We tried a little bit later, but today it's all video. Today that same course exists, a series of courses, but they're all video. They're lecture based.
Right.
And that sort of thing. But the first ones were not lecture based. They were lecture based, but they were a series of images. So you went through this reading, looked at an image, understand the topic, and answer questions.
So it was print.
It was print.
Yeah.
It was print, but it worked. It worked then. It was fairly successful. And we managed to get some of the courseware into some teaching institutions. I'll just mention one. It's very popular in the U.S., Cleveland Institute of Electronics.
Right. So your course was taken by the instructors there and was used as curriculum.
You see, I'm not sure. They purchased in volume, so I think they sold them to students. So I would actually go onto their website, CIE website, and there was a woodworking category, and students could purchase the course, but I'm not sure if it was part of a curriculum for one of their in-house courses or if it's just some self-interest or something. So I'm not sure.
But something happened. It was successful.
So I discovered that little niche and worked with that for a number of years, and the course evolved as technology evolved. So when I mentioned I've actually transition from high tech to low tech, that's not 100% true.
Yeah.
In fact, just to be able to do what I do is I have to be involved with computer technology in a larger way. I don't actually work for a corporation anymore, but I've embraced a lot of software along the way. Like I do CAD work, and I need to create videos and sort of the courses. I offer more courses now and tutorials, and they're well, not so much the tutorials, but the courses are all lecture based. So they've transitioned from they've moved away from the image and text based courses, and they're full video now, which is what people want today. So
yeah, it's so much more immersive.
Exactly.
So you're not a woodworker only or an artist. So you're also a teacher, right? And
yes.
I guess if you were to I suppose segment your time among those three items, what would it be like? Like, would it be, 25, 50? Like, do you spend more time teaching, for example? Do you spend more time creating unique pieces of furniture or of pieces of art, or making cabinets? How would you split your time?
That's a very, very good question, actually, because that's changing every year. So I spend less time teaching now, and I plan to spend more time teaching. But at the moment, I don't spend enough time teaching, but I do teach. So, for example, I would teach one-on-one students or two-on-one in my own studio, and because it's a very large studio, and was developed for that reason, along with furniture design and furniture making. But I continue to develop and evolve my online courseware that I continue to offer, although the market is considerably more competitive today than it ever was. So.
Of course, yeah. I've got a question on this very topic, actually, and I'm wondering, woodworking is a very, very old art. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but I'd say, at least to me, it doesn't seem it has the sex appeal, and sorry about I'm not sure if this is the right word, but let's say the sex appeal of, let's say, Arduino, right? And Raspberry Pi, especially. These things come out with flashing lights and state-of-the-art curricula, and look at what you can do with this and that and the other. And kids know about those things because they've got motors and they can make robots and so on. Woodworking seems to be like this very, very old thing, and I need a workshop, and I need tools, and I may lose a finger, as I'm cutting a piece of wood, and it's dangerous, therefore, especially for younger kids. So I wanted to check, what is the state of woodworking these days? Do you see that people become more interested or losing interested, or what's your feeling?
That's Peter. It's an incredibly good question, and I'm trying to understand that myself. I see a resurgence in woodworking right now at the moment because of the maker movement.
Yeah,
and because of the advent of YouTube and all this online video, people are experimenting, and they're actually going back to woodworking for some reason.
Yeah.
So I see more and more woodworkers creating videos than ever, and the maker movement is very strong, as you're probably aware. I mean, you're obviously aware. So I think the solution is to take the traditional woodworking and combine it with some technology, and make everybody happy, so they can still create using wood, but, for example, use CNC and 3D printers to create smaller components that are used in furniture.
Yeah, when it talks about tools.
Well, that's actually occurring now. I belong to an association, and some of the woodworkers in the association have embraced 3D printing to create small parts for furniture, like parts for joinery. So it's occurring now. It's so I would say there's a large resurgence and appreciation for this at the moment.
I should mention here that that's how I found you. So the story is that I released a course about a year and a half ago, about a Raspberry Pi. So I built a Raspberry Pi and a few bits and pieces that go with it, and the software that goes with it, and I use it to control my bench. So I press a button on the screen, it's a touch screen. I press a button, and my soldering iron is turned on, press another button, lights turn on, and things like that. And one of the students in that course actually made a wooden case for my Raspberry Pi and the bench computer. Before that, I put the Raspberry Pi inside a cardboard box that looked totally ugly. It was pretty bad.
Right.
I used the tape to hold it together. It was pretty bad. So he took pity on me, and he custom built a wooden case, and he sent it to me. It was already, put together nicely, and perfect work, like a one-of-a-kind piece. And that made me interested in woodworking, because I thought, I've got a 3D printer, but there's no way I could have built something as beautiful as that with plastic and my 3D printer. It just, it wouldn't look good. But with wood, you can actually build things like that interest makers, because now I combine my Raspberry Pi with a beautiful piece of furniture, and now this thing is really a beautiful piece of furniture. It's not just an electronic device.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I started looking online for courses, and that's how I found you, just to make the long story short.
Oh, okay.
And I thought if I did that, there's probably other people that would be feeling the same way and would be interested in this. And that's what...
Interesting you mentioned that,
Yeah.
because I think 2 years ago, I was approached by a couple of people. One of the people I used to work with, and they asked me to make a similar wooden box for an electronic Enigma machine. You know, the German
Yeah.
decoder,
Yep.
World War II.
Encrypted.
I thought that's what you were leading into. That you found out that I made that.
Oh, no, I didn't know about that.
About that.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it was very interesting. So I spent 2 weeks designing and building it so they can fit their electronics into it, and it was quite a success. So it's an authentic, modeled on the authentic German Enigma case.
Yeah.
So it houses everything. All the internals are electronics, but the case is wood, and it's in my blog. I blogged about it. So
Very interesting. I think there is something there. I've seen people, creating custom wooden enclosures for things like internet radios and speakers and clocks and things like that. So they combine this old natural material with workmanship and knowledge that goes back thousands of years with state-of-the-art technology. And I think that appeals to makers. Mm-hmm. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that, if you like, about being a maker, what that means for you. And maybe I'm also very interested about the tools that you use. If you'd like to take a few minutes and perhaps tell us what is your favorite tool these days. We can make it high-tech, say one high-tech and one low-tech tool.
Well, for high-tech, I use a computer. I just can't get away from computers.
You use CAD, right? Computer-aided design.
I use CAD. I use SketchUp.
Yes, Google.
And I use video editing software for my videos.
Yeah.
And possibly some other software that I can't think of right now. Whatever technology helps me to do my work, facilitate my work. And that's something I should address, because when I actually worked in computer field as a career, when I mentioned earlier I became disillusioned with it, I think it was because it was a job, it was a career. But I've taken a different approach to the whole industry now, and I'm actually embracing software now because I'm using it for my own for woodworking and for teaching and for creating courseware. So I'm falling in love with computers again in that regard. Not as much as woodworking, but I haven't turned my back on computers, and I've embraced them more so than ever.
Of course,
because my approach now is a user as opposed to supporting them or developing software for others.
I guess you, as a maker, right? As a maker is one of the things.
As a maker.
We have to constantly learn new skills, and software is a big part of it. You probably learned more than you ever have, Norman. I'm just looking at the work that you do, but both to support your business and your woodworking. Would you agree that, again, you constantly learn because you need to apply all these new things into your woodworking, into your teaching, and into your art constantly? It never becomes stable.
Yes. Regarding yes. Well, not so much the woodworking. The woodworking is I still focus on traditional woodworking. I use a combination of hand tools and some machinery. When I really try to keep technology out of that realm,
right?
Because this is my my space, my quiet space. So I do furniture design, and so I try not to mix technology with that.
Yeah.
But as far as marketing and courseware and teaching, I have to embrace computer software and computers I have to keep up with advances and all the software.
Yeah.
It's just like anything else. You can't get away from that. So I'm okay with that as long as there's a happy medium of traditional and technology for me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I find the same. I'd like to maybe switch to learning for the next few minutes. I'm very curious to know, what is your advice to people? It could be like perhaps somebody like me like a painter out there, like a maker who is interested in woodworking and would like to learn, but they live in an apartment or in a house where they can't dedicate a space for a woodworking studio or a workshop. And I know that some of the tools that you use in woodworking are quite big and noisy. What is the best way for them to learn at least the basics of woodworking so they can build something beautiful for themselves? And not something small, beautiful. It's not necessarily big.
They can start with my course, my online course.
Yeah, of course.
A little plug there. But I would suggest or recommend following an evening course or a weekend course at a community college.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, there are quite a few furniture making and woodworking schools now. You're in Australia, correct?
Yes.
I think there are quite a few there.
They are.
But in North America, there are considerable schools on both coasts and in the Midwest where you can actually attend a course for a week or two. So it's an immersion course. Mm-hmm. They have basic woodworking. And that's what I offer here too, by the way. This is my one-on-one or one-on-two training is
right, so people can come to you.
Well, I focus mostly on different aspects of furniture making. But for the general knowledge, these schools and community colleges, they still offer the woodworking courses. There's so many different ways to learn it. Now, you mentioned earlier that about the noise aspect and the small spaces. That's another subject, and there is a movement towards traditional woodworking because it doesn't involve machinery. So you can actually create furniture using hand tools, which is something I preach.
So what? Tell us more about it, because that sounds like a very compelling proposition to begin with. You don't need power tools; you need like a few basic hand tools.
In the past, people had homes with. I'm not sure if you have basements in your country, but they were able to set up larger woodworking spaces within and have the luxury of having machines to process wood and that sort of thing. But with the advent of condominiums and smaller spaces and the noise restrictions, they no longer can have machines. And woodworking machines are incredibly noisy.
Yeah.
So there's a large movement back to traditional woodworking and specifically hand tools, very much like woodworking that was performed 150 years ago before machines. So this works really well in a condominium, so you can have a small space. You don't actually generate dust doing that. Yeah, it's mostly shavings because dust is really a byproduct of machines.
Yeah.
Shavings are fine. They don't float in the air and affect your lungs and permeate your living spaces. So traditional woodworking in a small space works well, and people are really, really moving towards this. There are actually some schools. There's one in the city now over from mine. It's called the Unplugged Workshop. And they've gone to an extreme. They've gone to the extreme of not having even one machine.
Wow.
So they call it the Unplugged Workshop. The only thing that actually they plug in is a light bulb, for example, so you can see what you're doing.
It's really low tech, isn't it?
So really, really, I don't even go that far, but they've gone completely low tech because they have a waiting list of people because people that don't have the luxury of being able to have machines in their workshops, in their makeshift workshops. So it's interesting you brought that up because there is a solution. You don't need large space. You can just have a workbench with some small tools, some hand tools, and start making furniture. It's quite lengthier to do it.
This is so weird. Since that, for a maker who is immersed in computers and electronics constantly, probably the best way to get into woodworking is to go totally low tech and do what people did 150 to 100 years ago and start building wooden items that way. It's great.
Well, as part of my training, I mentioned I did a 3-year cabinet making program, but then I discovered a fine furniture making school, and I discussed that in the book. It's almost a whole chapter dedicated to that, and it's an immersive environment. And a large part of the curriculum involves traditional woodworking, and many schools like this are appearing now, are popping up. So it's traditional woodworking that involves hand tools, and this is where I fell in love with hand tools, because before that, prior to that, I did work with machines almost exclusively.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I even within the woodworking world, I've sort of done a career change and shifted from machines to low tech. I still use machines, of course, but I really become very appreciative of traditional woodworking,
Yeah.
and it's worked. Like I said, it's very advantageous now to be able to do that because of the limitations of condominium spaces, that people
Right.
just don't have large workshops anymore.
I think you have a course on hand tools, right? I think the hand tool class.
Yes.
So do you think
Yes.
that somebody like me would be able to take that class and get those tools and make furniture at home?
What I recommend to people is actually do a woodworking course before.
All right. So good
So
to an
woodworking
actual.
course
Yeah.
covers just the wood itself,
Mm-hmm.
understanding wood and its properties and joinery, and then the hand tool class is delves into the use of hand tools to be able to create joinery
Right.
and
Yeah.
finishing surfaces of wood. So
Because unlike the kind of courses that I teach, like electronics and programming, with woodworking, you actually need to learn how to hold those tools, the different properties of wood, and there's many different kinds of wood, and all those are hands-on things that really you need to be an apprentice of someone, like a teacher, in a face-to-face type of learning environment. So at least you need to get the basics in that way and then move on to video instructional content. Is that right?
well, no, you would actually begin with the video
Right.
and then just get a general overview of woodworking, for example, in the woodworking course,
Mm.
and then so at least you know where you're at. Like, how much knowledge do you already have? Do you already
Right.
you know nothing, and then you could decide what type of woodworking you would like to pursue. If you're traditional, and then you could go to hand tool route, for example, and either through the online course or attending a school. Like, I'm not really advocating my online courses. I'm just, they're there, and it's convenient for people to be able to at least dip their toe into the woodworking world to determine if they even want to pursue it.
Yes, that's right.
Because the actual investment of flying out somewhere to do a course or going through a community college, the time investment and is we're talking like hundreds and thousands of dollars. So
Yeah. Better be sure you want it. You're committed to it.
yeah, exactly. So unless you before you make a commitment like that, is to at least determine if some people, they think, oh well, it's just joining a few pieces of wood, but there's considerably more to it.
Mm. I wanted to ask you, Norman, do you teach kids? And in your experience, when is a good age, I guess, for people to start learning woodworking?
I would say 16 and above,
Right.
but with limitations. It's sort of like I would say have like a graduated driver's license, because there is some machinery involved. It's for liability reasons and all that.
Yeah.
I can't really teach anybody under 18, but at 16, 14 to 16, you can begin to learn. You can begin to whittle. You can begin to use hand tools, and possibly migrate to using machinery later in the teens.
Yeah.
So just because they're dangerous machines, and you really have to have your head screwed on straight and focus on
Yes. I understand the risks.
the risks. Are it's hard to leave somebody there using a machine if they're not focused on it.
Let's say that like a 16-year-old starts learning or is interested in learning woodworking, even if it's the very basics of woodworking that doesn't include any high-powered machines. I'm just thinking, what would be the particular benefits for that person as they're growing? So just to put it in context, we very often say, if young kids learn how to program, they're going to have all these amazing benefits as they're growing up, and computational thinking and learning to think analytically and all that. Are there some benefits similar to those that kids that are learning the basics, at least, of woodworking and some experience in it, that they'll be able to carry into their normal lives later on?
Absolutely, and that's you touched on a good point. That's lacking today, because I'm not sure about your country, but in the U.S. and Canada, they've over the years been doing away with wood shop
Yes, the
courses,
same here.
and same thing. Yeah, so they've removed all that in favor of classrooms,
Yeah,
computer
computer
settings.
dominate. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm total disagreement with that. Like I come from both worlds. I've spent decades in both worlds now, and creating and it's doing a disservice to our youth to not have them sit there and patiently create something with their hands or use
Mm,
their hands to create an object. It's something I would say it's almost mandatory to use it throughout your life.
right.
For some reason, later on, you at least know there's an option. If, for example, you do study computers, or like I did, and you find out that it's really not your calling, you could maybe revert back to that. You've had some exposure
Mm,
to woodworking or making or using or doing anything with your hands.
mm.
So because they've taken all this wood shop away, or all this hands-on training in schools, school children today, teenagers, are not even aware that this alternative world exists.
There's more than IKEA, right? We-
Exactly. They just assume everything's purchased in a store, but it doesn't have to be that way.
So is it that, what we are missing out, or what young people who don't have these opportunities are missing out is, the classic maker skills of ingenuity, being able to use your hands and your mind together to build something, the traditional materials as well, like how important wood is even today in almost everything that we do. In your opinion, what are the things that kids are missing out that don't have this opportunity today?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, there is a resurgence
Hmm.
of learning, creating objects with the hands because of the maker movement.
Mm.
But part of the maker movement does have wood. For just a small example, is the case you were referring earlier,
Yeah.
referring to the case to contain the electronics, the one I built
Yeah.
and the one you needed to have built. So because of that exposure, people are also discovering wood again and
Yeah.
woodworking
Yeah.
through that maker movement. So I'm very positive that this is a good development, and we might actually. I think I've read somewhere in some industry periodicals that some counties in the U.S. have actually brought back some woodworking training because
Yeah.
they've realized it was a mistake, and there aren't enough people out there that are
Yeah.
woodworking today. So
And that's because it's one of those skills that are really needed, but that don't seem to attract people in that industry as a career, right? Furniture makers,
exactly.
for example. Yeah. So there is also career opportunity.
It's a good point because what you said is, yeah, the whole hands-on thing with the maker movement. But then again, it's not a career, and the
Mm.
young people today, I don't think, are embracing this as a career any longer.
Yeah.
It's primarily a hobby or an interest or a pastime, something interesting. But as a career, it's kind of word scary. But there's a concern that people are no longer looking at this as a career. So the corollary to that is the development, the automation of furniture making.
Industrialized. Yeah.
It's become so automated, a lot of it, that they've overcome that drawback of not having people enter the skilled people enter the industry any longer. So they can overcome that through machinery, through
Yes.
automation.
Yeah.
But it's rapidly evolving, and what I tell you now could change in a year or two. I'm not sure where the
Right.
trend
Yeah.
is.
But I think even though the furniture making business is really industrialized now, the artistic aspect and the hobbyist in a way aspect is never going to fade away, especially when there's people making things. There are going to be people that want to make things with wood. So from that point of view, I think it's probably a golden age coming up for woodworking.
Well, yes, when that actually dovetails into the path I've taken.
Hmm.
The furniture I make is unique, one of a kind pieces. Every piece is different from the other piece.
Yeah.
It's more of a combination of woodworking, furniture making, and art, because the industry is not set up to create furniture like this. It's mass-produced, consumer-oriented, and it's really not designed. So this is the niche that people entering this field could work towards, because this is actually a very stable and growing niche. There is still a market for unique one-of-a-kind furniture pieces and art, and so sculptural work and wood and other medium. So this is a good reason to learn these skills, and a way for people to convert the skills into I wouldn't say a career, but some form of some way to earn money to
as well
subsist from. Yes,
that's great advice. But I think, just looking at the time, let's move into some so-called rapid fire questions. Well, actually, we never stick to the name. We say that let's do some rapid fire questions, then take us another half an hour. But it's okay, it doesn't matter. I wanted to ask you, Norman, because we have quite a few educators, teachers listening to our podcast, what advice would you give teachers in relation to woodworking? And assume that these teachers are not woodworkers themselves, but they do appreciate the importance and what it can contribute to the students' education. So what can you say to them?
I would say don't dismiss woodworking as a skill that's had its time or is from another period. Embrace it, because the process of learning woodworking, as a student, develop their hand-eye coordination for one. They create objects. They're satisfied because they've actually created something they can actually take home with them. So there are other aspects of woodworking that don't have to be specific to woodworking. So the fact that the students might realize that they're very creative with their hands. Not necessarily woodwork. It could be metalworking. It could be anything else involving their hands. So they could discover this opportunity, this creative aspect that hasn't come forward, hasn't come through just from computer studies, for example, or from textbook studies.
Yeah, I'm thinking in the context of STEM education, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or STEAM, when you put an A there, I'm just thinking that woodworking applies in multiple areas. Like you can see woodworking definitely being part of a science project or an engineering project, like building frames, for example, building a wooden bridge in order to show the various tensions at various parts of the bridge. So it definitely comes into technology and science, but definitely it comes into the art part of STEAM as well, because you can express yourself as an artist through wood, just like you do, Norman. So it's one of those things where you can, whatever you learn can be applied in so many different areas. So it's definitely something worth looking at.
Yes. We could actually just simply look at wood as one medium. So if you just consider it as
like canvas, right, for painters.
Exactly. So just consider it as just a medium, and if the goal is to introduce students to the creativity, hand-eye coordination, creating objects, just consider wood as a medium. So it doesn't necessarily doesn't lead into a woodworking career.
Exactly.
So this is the mistake people make. They just assume, well, woodworking's a thing of the past. Not really. Working with the medium, working with your hands is not. So you don't necessarily have to follow through and become a woodworker.
Yes.
You can use those skills.
You can be a programmer and be a woodworker. That's right.
Well, there's people are surprised at the amount of thought and engineering that goes into furniture making. People just dismiss it, but I've designed a couple of chairs, and I could not believe the amount of the ergonomics and the science that goes into chair design, and I've had to learn all this, and actually learned all this on my own.
Yes, to make a good chair, you need to be knowledgeable in anatomy, for example, so that it's comfortable, right?
Yeah, but there's a whole 3 or 4 stresses that chairs are subject to, because you're actually, unlike a a static piece of furniture. It's a dynamic piece of furniture. So if you're sitting on it, you're introducing stresses into the joints. So it's a whole different world of woodworking, involving engineering, mathematics, technology, and science. So,
there you go. It's all there. And I've got another question. So we love books and we read books constantly. At least I try to read whenever I have a few minutes. And you've got some very interesting books that obviously you recommend to everybody. But apart from your books, is there one or two books that you'd recommend people to read? Perhaps books that influenced you a lot as well and informed you as a woodworker and teacher?
Well, I'm a very huge follower and disciple of somebody called James Krenoff. You probably never heard the name.
No.
But he is a traditional woodworker, and he just passed away a few years ago. But he worked with mid-century modern designs, and he's written a series of books. His name is James Krenoff. He's written a series of books, mostly about the philosophy, the mindset behind woodworking. So he talks about the skills, of course, but the books sort of romanticize the whole woodworking experience. And if you have any doubts about actually getting into woodworking and furniture making, after reading his books, a lot of people have
converted. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, it's not so much a how-to book at all. It's mostly about the appreciating wood and the different characteristics of wood and using. So normally, a normal furniture maker would design a piece of furniture and just grab some wood and use that wood to build the furniture. But James Krenoff had a totally different approach. He would design one-of-a-kind, unique pieces of furniture based on the wood. So he would examine the wood and look at its characteristics, its colors,
right,
and then come up with a design to accentuate these characteristics in the wood. So it's a totally different perspective of furniture making.
It's so interesting.
Quite interesting.
So his approach was to not dominate the medium, is to work with the medium, to blend with it.
Exactly. Not so much to use a medium as a medium, but prioritize the medium itself and bring it to the forefront. And then
that's a whole philosophy. That's a whole philosophy there on its own. Like you can go so far with that. Yeah,
there's actually a lot of the school I attended, the fine furniture making the school, was a derivative of College of the Redwoods in California that James Krenoff was, I think, the main instructor for many, many years. And they offered a year or two long courses, their curriculums, programs on furniture making. So one of the founders of the school I attended, was actually a student there for 2 years. So it's very interesting how he brought back all that knowledge and he opened his own school, and it's sort of a recursive thing, you might say. So I've embraced that knowledge and I carry it forward. So
that's amazing. Yeah. I'm going to put that in my reading list because I see there a whole philosophy of life as well. I want to explore that from that perspective of.
Yeah, I think you would enjoy them. James Krenoff, I think there were 4 or 5 books.
I'm going to look them up.
Krenov.
Let me just do a quick search now. So James, so Krefno.
No, Krenov. Krenoff.
Krenoff, got it, yeah.
He has a Swedish background.
Got him, yeah, James Krenoff, yeah, woodworker. Born in Siberia, 1920 in Russia. Wow.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to include those in the show notes as well, along with your books. And I think there's going to be great resources for people.
I have other books. Lately, I read. I migrate towards books, more philosophical books on the why and how of why people do things, as opposed to just the technical aspects.
How to do things, yeah.
Why, philosophy behind woodworking, philosophy behind making, and I study early makers, what drove them, what motivated them, what inspired them. That's what I enjoy today. Not so much the how-to books, as I must have 200 how-to books here, and I've stopped reading them because I write my own books. I developed my own courseware on how to, so I'm a little bit
Yeah.
past that stage. But for somebody starting out and unsure of things, maybe it's a good idea just to read about the books I just referred to develop
Yeah.
a different appreciation of wood, and not so much just the mechanical aspect of wood as a
Absolutely.
medium.
I think as a teacher as well, and I'm just saying that again because a lot of our listeners are teachers, you need to go beyond the how, right? The students very often are inspired not by the how so much, but because of the why. Why do I need to do this? Like, I get that a lot from my students as well. And even when I was teaching at university, students would constantly ask, why am I supposed to learn this? Okay, the how, it's fine, it's technical. It's the why that seems to be more important in most learning situations. And I think that the role of the teacher, in a large extent, is also to convey that rather than the how.
That's a good point, because I must say that I sort of become that way because of my formative years in school. We're talking about 35, 40 years ago. I went through the school system, and we were just told to learn things and never question why. And I'll just give you an example. I had a difficulty with mathematics, specifically calculus. And it's only when one of the courses in the program I was studying at the time was applied calculus that everything made sense for me all of a sudden, because I just you can apply it in certain contexts. So I maybe I'm an individual that needs to understand why I do things or why I should be doing things. So I'm not the only one.
No, definitely.
Judging from what you're saying.
Most people are like that. Like. Especially because you're a maker, you need to know why you do something. Like, there's got to be a purpose as a maker. But I do think that most people learn better if they have a reason, not just...
well, we're saying that, but I also do wood art, right?
Yes.
And wood art is completely speculative work. You just
exploratory. Yeah.
It's well, we use the word building on spec. So it's speculative. So you just create the piece and put it out there to see if so you don't actually query people to see if this is the right direction. You just make the piece. As an artist, it's like painting on a canvas. You just create the piece without any agenda or motives, and then work from there.
Okay. Well, that was definitely not a couple of rapid fire questions. So it's okay though. I really enjoyed that. So just to close our interview, Norman, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, I have two websites, and I'm on social media. I have a large exposure on social media through Instagram and Twitter.
Yeah.
And,
so you're on Twitter.
My Twitter handle is WOODSKILLS.
Yep.
And the Instagram is WOODSKILLS Mag.
Yep.
WOODSKILLS with MAG, one word.
Got it.
Or Pirollo Design.
So that's your main website at pirollodesign.com, and your courses and books are there as well. And you've got a magazine as well,
actually,
right?
The courses and books are there and at WOODSKILLS. WOODSKILLS is more of a educational site.
Yeah. Okay. We'll have both on our website. And there's a magazine as well that you publish called the WOODSKILLS magazine.
Yes, and actually, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because today is the day that I just released issue 2 of WOODSKILLS magazine.
Great.
This is a magazine that I've launched. I developed late last year, and worked with a very, very small team. We had an early issue in the spring, issue 1, and we've just today, realistically speaking, today is the day I just released issue 2. So it has a different approach to woodworking magazines, because I've written for magazines. I've been a contributor to magazines, woodworking for years, and I really don't like what I see anymore. So I've taken a different approach.
Yeah.
And,
So
that's the magazine.
Semi-annual magazine. I can see here the first issue. You talk about woodworkers and building woodworker profiles, how to improve your studio, hand tool techniques, and discover tools to work.
Yes, focus on hand tools. And the second issue is just so I'm not a complete Neanderthal. It's a term we use in the woodworking world. So you just disassociate yourself from technology. There's a chapter on social media, how to work with social media as a furniture maker. It's a furniture maker edition. So some of the topics pertaining to furniture making specifically. So
Highly recommended.
hopefully there'll be a third and a fourth issue.
Yeah, I think it's worth the effort going in there as well. I know it's a lot of work, but
It's a huge undertaking.
it's your voice.
Much more than I ever anticipated.
Yes, it is your voice. Well, thank you very much, Norman. I really appreciate your time this Wednesday afternoon in Ottawa. I learned a lot personally, and again, thank you for joining me in this episode of Stemiverse.
No, I appreciate it, and I thank you for inviting me.
That's all for this episode. The notes for this episode that include links to many of the resources mentioned and information on how to get in touch with Norman are available on our website, techexplorations.com/p/Stemiverse. Each episode comes with its own page on the Tech Explorations website and a goldmine of information in the notes. This Stemiverse podcast episode was produced by Tech Explorations. Do you have any questions or suggestions? Would you like to nominate a friend or colleague to be our guest? Please email us at pa@texplore.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes by searching for the name of our podcast, Stemiverse. That's Stemiverse. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next time.